Presentation of dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho.
Coming up, a state senator resigns, one of Idaho's most prominent businessmen dies, and presidential candidates stump through the gem state. Those are just some of the stories we'll discuss on our monthly reporter Roundup. Dialogue is next. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Marcia Franklin. It's time for our monthly roundup of the news in Idaho, and there's a lot of it, so I'll get right to introducing my guests. With me in Boise is the editorial page editor of the Idaho Statesman, Kevin Richert, and KTVB anchor and reporter, Mark Johnson. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Also joining us is Molly Messick, the broadcast reporter for Boise State Public Radio's StateImpact project. Welcome to you.
Thanks.
And in Pocatello, from our studio on the campus of Idaho State University, is Coeur Taule, the editorial page editor of the Post-Register newspaper in Idaho Falls. Thanks for driving to Pocatello, Coeur, and I hope the weather's a bit better. I understand you've had heavy winds and some flooding over there.
Yeah, the wind stopped blowing this morning, so no, we're all good, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
You're welcome. And in the studio of North Idaho College in Coeur d'Alene is Mike Patrick, the managing editor of the Coeur d'Alene Press. We're happy to have you with us, Mike.
Thank you, Marcia. Happy to be here.
So what stories are you following? Give us a call, toll free, at 1-800-973-9800. Well, first up is the story of Senator John McGee. And we have footage of Senator McGee with our host, Greg Hahn of Idaho Reports from last year. Kind of a golden boy on his way up, we thought, to potentially even running for governor one day, and yet kind of a tragic downfall at this point. Just allegations at this point, but allegations of sexual harassment. He has resigned. We have to say, of course, that he denies these allegations. Thoughts? First you, Mark, you've probably known him as a reporter for a while.
Long time. And, you know, Marcia, as you alluded to, prior to his incident from Father's Day weekend 8 months ago, he was touted by many of the political analysts in this region as someone who could make a run for the governor's seat in the next 4, 6, 8 years. Not yet 40 years old, but one of the rising stars in state politics. So to see this happen in this amount of time is nothing short of meteoric.
And Kevin, in fact, you wrote an editorial about this entitled John McGee's Downfall, Sudden But Not Surprising. You say that until Father's Day, John McGee could have been described as the most image-conscious member of the Idaho legislature, but, quote, now it all appears to have been a facade, an image of political self-control at variance with a lack of personal self-control.
And I think that's what prompted the Senate leadership to move so quickly. Even though we're in the allegation stage, the allegations of sexual harassment were so serious, on top of the bizarre circumstances surrounding his DUI arrest Father's Day weekend, that Senate leadership felt like it had to move very quickly.
Do you think, to their credit, do you think?
I think they did what they had to do. They got the allegations handed to them on Saturday. They met with the staffer on Monday, and the resignation happened on Wednesday. I feel like they felt like they probably had to do this to kind of rehabilitate the image of the Senate.
You know, you can go out on the internet and see whatever you want to see, but there have been some kind of Machiavellian comments out there like, okay, maybe he was set up because of what happened at Father's Day and people didn't want him to be there. That, of course, doesn't lend any credence to a woman who says she's been sexually harassed. So it'll all
Well, that all will play out. But as far as the Father's Day arrest,
right,
he did plead guilty fairly quickly after that.
So what's next? I know the Idaho State Police is looking into this. The AG has turned it over to that entity, and then a replacement has to be picked soon, right?
Right. That'll all happen fairly quickly, and the caucus has to select a new chairperson to replace McGee. That should happen fairly quickly as well.
And clearly, we are going to see this play out in the coming weeks, months, because of the evidence that she claims, again, she was sexually harassed, and she says she has the proof. whether it's a cell phone, whether it's on an email, whether it was verbal. She says she has the
So
proof.
you know who that person is,
We
the
do.
alleged victim.
We do, and so this is all going to be very public if this goes through the judicial system as it appears Senator McGee, former Senator McGee, would like it to.
And Corey Taule in Pocatello, any thoughts? I know as a reporter you covered John McGee as well.
Yeah, it's just, you know, politics aside, it's sad to see somebody implode like this, and you know, I mean, all the things that are being said. I mean, you know, he brought this on himself, and I have no idea what the details of the allegations are, if they're true or not. But you know, getting back to what Kevin was talking about with the Senate leadership, I think Brent Hill and Bart Davis are to be commended, and we write about this a little bit tomorrow. But these guys moved quickly, and yeah, they did what they had to do, but they also did what I think they felt was right, and. You know, clearly at this point, John needed to go, and you just hope he can, you know, get himself straightened out. I know he's got a young family, and you know, again, setting politics aside, you just hope the guy can get straight.
Well, another huge story, not only for the Treasure Valley, but for Idaho in general, is the death of Steve Appleton, a person who, in his own life, took risks, calculated risks, physical risks. But nevertheless, it's still a shock when something like this happened. Died February 3rd in an airplane crash, a Seoul airplane crash. Today was the funeral. Mark, KTVB, carried that funeral live. And comments from everyone from his tennis coach to Governor Otter. Quite a ceremony, several thousand people there.
There were, and the tone was so right, Marcia. You know, it was a tribute, and it was a loving tribute to a loving father and husband. Sure, he was an adventurer. He was one of the most incredible businessmen this state will ever see, certainly. But above all of that, he was a guy who loved his family, and that came out today, and golly, we miss him.
There's some footage of the service. I thought it was interesting. The president of Boise State University, Bob Custis, said, "What do we do now? What do we do next?" It was interesting to hear. And then Governor Otter quoted Jack London, "It's better to be ashes than dust. I would rather that my spark burn out in a brilliant blaze than it should be stifled by dry rot," calling him Edison-esque, and from my vantage point, seemed to be choking up.
Yeah.
We learned more about his legacy today than perhaps we knew from all the people coming forward to talk about him.
Yeah, and it is an uneasy road ahead for those of us that were used to having this guy who was so ingrained in this community and did so much philanthropy at so many places. And there are a lot of questions right now saying, okay, now what? Mm-hmm. And that's what the governor vocalized.
Well, let's talk about the coverage of his death, because it's a media story, how you cover something like this. And KTVB had to pull together a team, you had to pull together a team, Boise State Radio had to pull together a team. Let's talk about KTVB that day of coverage. How did you approach that? And let's talk too about the controversy of the tower, the audio from the tower. You chose not to play that.
Not to, right. So disturbing. Again, here's a community member. Here is a neighbor, really a neighbor of ours, all of ours. And we just made the decision that because the tower tape was so distressful and so disturbing to listen to for anybody who knew anything about Steve and his family, that we chose not to run it and not to put it on our website.
Is that tilting too much towards
sensitivity?
Okay.
Yeah.
So
and you know what? Charge us with tilting too far towards sensitivity.
You printed the verbiage from the tower tape.
We printed the verbiage. I mean, verbiage is different than listening to the tape. We got some feedback from at least a couple of readers about photos that we took from the hangar where the NTSB had the wreckage spread out to examine. I found it to be very moving, very compelling depiction of what NTSB was investigating, but again, you have to weigh that against the sensitivity. We felt the news value overrode was the overriding issue, though.
And we're looking now at the 6-page spread. There's the photo you're talking about. You covered it from all different angles. Before we move on, just how difficult was it for both your entities, and then I'll ask you about this, to pull together a team to cover this from all the different angles, business, personal. What
Well,
happened?
You just, and I'm sure Mark and Molly can attest to it, you just scramble. You get all hands on deck. I mean, we knew that there was a crash at the airport. We knew that there was a fatality. It was only a couple hours later that we started to hear rumors that Steve Appleton was involved. And when that happens, you scrap all plans, you get everybody involved, and you try to get as many angles as you can. I mean, it's the cliche about newspapers, and there's a lot of truth to it, is that you're the first draft of history. And that's one of those days where you really feel like you have the responsibility to rise to that responsibility.
Now, Mr. Appleton hadn't talked to the Statesman in quite some
That's right.
time. Maybe we were thinking since
It's
maybe
been several
2006.
years.
I did hear from a Micron employee that they felt that the Statesman coverage was very balanced, considering that Appleton had not talked to you in so long. I think you quoted other interviews he had done, and that you didn't let that come into your coverage.
You're writing about the man who's been the CEO of one of the largest private companies in the state, and the role of that company and the role of that man in leading that company. The differences that he had with the Statesman is a very small footnote in his professional life, let alone his overall life, and we treated it as such.
Well, I'm sure we'll be talking about his legacy for a long time to come. Molly Messick, you're with the StateImpact Idaho project out of Boise State Public Radio, also reporting for National Public Radio. You covered this story as well with the team from Boise State Radio, giving it some context, looking at it from an economic standpoint, a business standpoint, yes?
That's right. We were also scrambling to cover the breaking news, to do the verification that everybody has to do in a newsroom, to cover it as it was happening, to be there for the press conference. I was also working on a context piece, so that meant talking to a mentor of Steve Appleton, someone who knew him as a young person, also talking to a semiconductor industry analyst, someone who could really tell us what kind of a gap this is going to leave in the industry, as well as at Micron itself in terms of leadership. So those are the questions we were really trying to answer.
And we see not the economic side of Steve Appleton here, but the playful side of his life. But it seems like the transition has been very smooth to a new CEO, almost as if, I mean, we don't want to say that they thought about, you always have to think about a transition plan, but it seems to have been very smooth.
What we heard from analysts is that there's a very deep bench of talent, that Steve Appleton did a great job of really grooming people internally.
Let me ask you to tell folks a little bit more about StateImpact Idaho before we move on. You're a relatively new project, but you'll be growing, and it's not the only StateImpact office in the country, is it?
That's right. StateImpact is a collaboration of NPR and local member stations, in this case, Boise State Public Radio. There are 8 different pilot projects around the country right now, so it's really pretty great that Idaho gets to be one of them. It's focused on doing substantive reporting on public policy. Here we also have an economic focus. So we're really just trying to bring those two strains together, public policy, economics, and do stories that are really describing the impact of those things in people's lives.
And all over the state, not just in Boise. You'll be
Precisely.
We've had a piece out of Lucky Friday Mine. You've gone to Fairfield.
We were in American Falls late last year.
And you've been looking, most specifically the last couple of months, profiling people who are out of work.
That's right. We've been doing what we're calling the Jobless in Idaho series, and so we're following 5 people who are experiencing joblessness and going through that. So, we've talked to, for example, my co-reporter Emily Ritter-Saunders is profiling a gentleman who was laid off from the Clearwater paper mill, the sawmill, and he has since found work in the oil field, and he's a single father. He'll be leaving 3 teenage daughters behind.
What we're showing on the screen is your app, your unemployment app that people can find by going to StateImpact Idaho, and it's very fascinating. You can check any county and take a look at where the unemployment rate is compared to the rest of the state and over time, and then you can submit your own story as well, yes?
That's right. Whether you're unemployed, whether you're in the process of finding a new job, whether you're sort of in between, we're really encouraging people to call in, to write in with their stories. We're hoping this will be a really diverse way of representing unemployment in the state over time. It integrates the Jobless in Idaho series, and also it's a way of visualizing the data.
Seems like we're starting to see a turnaround. I know people that are getting jobs.
It's gradual, but
just
we're
lately,
hopeful.
so we can hope on that. Speaking of economics, we'll go up to North Idaho, talk to Mike Patrick. Mike, the Lucky Friday Mine, just about half an hour, 35 minutes from you, has been closed, and that's because of safety considerations, and 200 plus miners are out of work. What's the sense of the impact there? They may be half an hour away, but they come into Coeur d'Alene, yes?
That's true, Marcia, and it's about 300 people, and the devastating impact is this is largely a service industry area, but these are six-figure jobs. Most people don't realize miners, because of the danger involved in their jobs, these are 75,000 to 150,000 jobs. So our best estimate is it's about an $80 million hit to North Idaho.
And the sense is that perhaps, I know you've written about this, that it's time to, in your view, sharpen your shovel and maybe start putting some money into some other arenas like the health sciences, which are, well, last time I was up in Coeur d'Alene, there's a whole kind of row of health industry businesses over in Post Falls. And there's a school for that, there's a department for that at NIC.
Well, it's economically too in our region, it's the fastest growing area. The most new jobs have been created in the health industry, and NIC, which is where I'm sitting right now, is key to helping that industry fill jobs. So there is, in fact, a competitor of Hecla Mine who recently retired, Dennis Wheeler, has unofficially headed up an effort to try to get local people involved, get some of those jobs, and expand the health sciences building here at NIC.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. And Corey in Pocatello, the INL, major employer in your area, has announced a layoff, 185 people, and also has some safety issues that the federal government has come down hard on. They're calling them recurring deficiencies, including a November 8th incident when 16 lab employees were exposed to an uncontrolled dose of radiation. You've written about this. We see the headline here, creating a safety culture. And I think you've gotten some response to this where you say, talk to site workers and other folks in a position to know, and they'll tell you Battelle's upper management is falling short, yet another corporation that's lost sight of what really matters. So in your view, this is pretty serious.
It's very serious. And, you know, in fairness, talk to Battelle's upper managers and they'll disagree with this. But, you know, it's a very fine line that folks walk out there. It's a very important place for the country, for the state, for the region. And things have to be done right. I mean, the primary asset they have out there is the confidence of the people within our community in Idaho Falls, that when you send your loved ones out there to go do this very dangerous work, they're going to come home. And when you start talking to people and they say there is the culture isn't what it should be, then you start to take a second look at things. And the DOE coming down like they did, and in a fairly scathing report saying this particular exposure was preventable. It should not have happened. You've got to start asking these serious questions. And you know, again, in fairness, Battelle has a different view of this, but you know, certainly there's work to be done out there. And frankly, you know, when the contract's up in 3 or 4 years, their contract's up in 3 or 4 years, and people will be taking a hard look at that. And they've got some time to get this right, and they can get the fine rescinded. But you know, there's a lot of eyes on them, and there needs to be.
Great. Well, thanks for bringing that to light. I want to talk, there's no easy transition for this, but another big story in Idaho has been the visit of the presidential candidates, the GOP presidential candidates to the state. And this is a result of moving the GOP into a Super Tuesday caucus, March 6th, something that's coming up, and has resulted, as we can see from these photos, in all these candidates coming here, energizing the base.
Well, it's turned Idaho from maybe the most irrelevant state in presidential primary politics. Despite its Republican credentials, a late May primary was basically meaningless.
Right.
You know, Super Tuesday, you're in the middle of the race in what's become a very competitive race. So I think the moving up of the caucus has probably exceeded the Idaho GOP's wildest dreams of how successful it might be.
And we should say, although Newt Gingrich wasn't in those pictures, Mike Patrick, he, as we speak right now, is holding a rally in Coeur d'Alene, so that makes the other candidate to come through.
And these candidates know that they are treading on friendly territories when they come here, and it's fun for them. I heard 2 out of the 3 last week say, I've got to come here more often. I love Idaho. And they're playing to their base. They're playing to masses, too.
Santorum drew quite a crowd.
Nearly
here.
3,000 at Capitol High School.
Is it a given that Mitt Romney will win this state?
No, not at all, because it's a caucus. And because it's a caucus, supporters are going to have to sit there probably for several hours sticking to their candidates. So I don't think it's a given at all. I think Santorum has gained some momentum with social conservatives.
And Paul.
Ron Paul won 24% of the vote in that irrelevant primary in May. He's got a base, so I don't think it's a given at all. I think it's a very close caucus.
And isn't the caucus process going to be interesting on Super Tuesday? We're in a state that's used to going to a polling place, spending 5 minutes in a polling booth, and walking out. This caucus could take hours or more. And it'll be interesting to see how it's received.
That's what makes it interesting and unpredictable. We sat down, we had Mike Simpson in with the editorial board yesterday, and he's a Romney supporter. And he said, in a primary, Romney wins. And I asked him, well, it's a caucus. Does Romney win? I don't know. And that's Simpson. He knows something about winning elections in the state.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention a Salon.com article that was written about Frank Vandersloot, who is a businessman over in eastern Idaho. He's given $1 million to the Romney campaign, and he's one of the people in charge of his finance committee. And it was a pretty excoriating article that was then picked up by cable television as well, and basically talked about a lot of allegations that he has shut down reporting, threatened reporters for saying certain things about him. Corey, how is this playing over in eastern Idaho, where Mr. Vandersloot is a major businessman?
You know, this is just another day in the life for Frank, I think. You know, everybody over here knows him so well and has dealt with him so long that, you know, there wasn't a lot new in there for us, and people made up their minds about him a long time ago. And, you know, I've covered Frank as a reporter for a long time and now as an editorial writer. I've certainly never experienced any of the things that were talked about in the story. We've had our disagreements. I've taken a 7 a.m. phone call from him because he didn't like the story once. You know, we've gone back and forth about some editorials, but you know, never any efforts to shut me down or anything like that. But there were some real fundamental disagreements between the paper and Frank over the Scout series, which was referenced quite heavily in that story. And you know, it's just it's part of being who he is, and it's going to happen when you give $1 million to Romney. People are going to start looking at you and start turning over rocks. And you know, there were some inaccuracies in the stories, but there was also you know, there was also truths that were hit there. So, but over here, you know, we live with him. We know Frank, and people made up their minds a long time ago.
And that's you have an editorial that's about to come out that says essentially the same thing.
I think if people read the 3,600-word Salon article and they read Frank Vandersloot's 1,750-word response, it'll be interesting reading. I don't think it changes many minds.
Okay. Let's jump forward and take a look at some of the headlines that all of you have written recently about the Idaho legislature, and you certainly haven't, any of you, let them off the hook. Mike Patrick up in Coeur d'Alene, you wrote an editorial piece called Redefining a Party, in which you, among other things, said that Denny and Semenko over the reapportionment issue got caught up in trying to out-conservative their conservative party. Quote, we're hopeful that the Republican Party will find leaders more in tune with this great state's ideals. We offer a sincere suggestion for those who argue the party isn't conservative enough. Declare yourself a constitutionalist, a libertarian, or even an anarchist, but stop masquerading as something you're not.
Well, Marcia, just remember, this is the land of Phil Hart. And I rest my case. Okay.
And over in eastern Idaho, Corey, your editorial was called Time to Reclaim Our Government. And you also had some strong words. This was in regards to the locking of the doors when the Occupy movement bill was up. It's time to reclaim our Capitol building, evict the boss, who in this case is Lawrence Denny, and anybody who supports him, unlock the doors, open the windows of the people's house, and allow a fresh, wholesome breeze to blow on through.
Yeah, we've had a good run with these guys, but it's time for something new. I mean, the interesting part is I just wrote about Dennis Lake, who's a Blackfoot Republican. In 2002, Dennis Lake was the conservative challenger to House Speaker Bruce Newcomb. Now Dennis in that House Republican caucus is a moderate, at best. There's a guy who's trying to increase the cigarette tax, trying to tax internet sales, which is long overdue, trying to plug the Percy perk. That House Republican caucus has moved so far to the right where it's become really counterproductive, and we're starting to see it with this huge backlog of maintenance issues in buildings, roads, bridges, with Medicaid cuts that go over $100 million when you talk about the federal match. I mean, it's to the point where it's irresponsible, quite frankly.
And Kevin, you've written quite a few things, including a look at the Add the Words campaign, which failed. And you called that issue, and here we see the picture of people who were disappointed by that. You said that it was shameful.
Well, and what I found shameful about it is you didn't even have a hearing. You had a very perfunctory introduction of the concept of the bill and a voice vote. You took no testimony. About 300 people showed up thinking that their issue might get some attention from the committee. It was clear that they were not going to get attention from the committee. It was a show with an eye towards this closed primary in May. It was very clear to me that this was theatrics on the part of the committee.
And you know what, in television we have to have what's called a kicker, speaking of theatrics, and we'll go back up to Coeur d'Alene from that. You've got an issue up there, Mike. It sounds like people are having an issue with dropping their pants, cracking down on public trowel droppers. A new law has just been passed by your city council to deal with these people, which of course can be serious.
Can you really talk about this on public television?
I don't know.
I did ask Marcia beforehand what words were okay to say, so I'm going to be very careful here, and I'm also really going to do your audience a favor and not demonstrate what we're talking about.
Thank you.
I could have hauled in some 18-year-old kid from campus here, but
And it pretty much would
and
apply.
I have to tell you, I have never been victimized by trout dropping, nor have I witnessed it. But our city council on Tuesday night did, by a 5-to-1 vote, outlaw trout dropping in public. And it now carries a 180-day sentence and up to $1,000 fine if you're convicted of it. And the serious part of it, Marcia,
Yes, it
is
is. It can be serious.
if you're, if this is somebody who is mentally ill and is exposing himself, or I guess herself, in a really nasty way, then that's completely different.
That's a different
but this
situation.
Apparently, it is. But this apparently is some phenomenon. I mean, you go down any street in a downtown area, and it seems like most of the young men have their pants halfway down their bottoms anyway.
Well,
What's next?
So,
Streaking on
apparently
college
this
campuses?
That's right. They're outlaw.
That's
well,
what's next.
we are going to have a web extra and talk about some more issues that are happening around this state. And I thank you all for joining us. Thanks for tuning into this edition of Dialogue. I'm Marcia Franklin. Good night.
Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho. Check out our website, like us on Facebook, or follow us on Twitter.